of which we haven't seen in this country since the Vietnam War protests of the 60s and 70s. And these are even bigger. We've been provided with the chance of a lifetime to be the people we always thought we were. People who strongly believe in the inherent worth and dignity of every person. People who are willing to engage in the fight to make America free in a way that it's never been free before. On Tuesday night, February 28th, one of those other dates that will live in infamy, Donald J. Trump put on his designer sheep's clothing to address a joint session of Congress and the American people. But sheep's clothing could not disguise the wolf beneath it. Speaking in incredibly full sentences, filled with over-the-top florid imagery, in words he obviously did not write himself, he played the part of president, sticking to the teleprompter for the first time in his entire political career. But beneath those flowery words and calm, dulcet tones were the same polarizing ideas he has been presenting since the beginning of his campaign. Ideas that are strongly based in fear. The Trump administration is ramping up a campaign of hate, fear, and misinformation, the likes of which haven't been seen since World War II Germany. We're here in Derby Line this afternoon to stand or sit in solidarity with immigrants and refugees who are currently being hunted down with a certain mad abandon. In January, Trump signed an executive order entitled Enhancing Public Safety in the Interior of the United States. How many of you have heard of this? Not tiny. In all of the brouhaha over the Muslim ban, this has managed to slip in under most people's radar. And here's what it calls for: execution of the immigrant laws against all removable aliens, and leaves to the judgment of immigration officers whether or not these removable aliens pose a risk. As a result of this order, and despite the fact that Trump has repeatedly stated that he's only going to send bad hombres after the U.S., agents of immigration services have been picking up innocent people who have been living peacefully in this country for many years and who serve no threat to our security, tearing them away from their families for deportation. A man in Southern California was recently taken into custody while dropping off his children at school. His most serious crime was that he'd had a DUI ticket 10 years earlier. This cruel practice is causing immeasurable amount of fear and anxiety among all immigrants, as well as their employers. It's been suggested that this roundup is meant to pressure more people to self-deport. This is not what we are as a nation. Just a few yards away is our border with Canada. Hello, Canada. I can see it from my front porch. It is disheartening that so many immigrants are leaving our country to seek safety with our neighbors to the north because we no longer seem a safe haven. When Canada lifted its visa requirements on Mexico this past December, Stéphane Dion, Minister of Foreign Affairs, said, "Canada and Mexico have a rich and diverse relationship. I am confident that the lifting of the visa requirement will facilitate people-to-people ties, opportunities for youth mobility, education and prosperity, and that it will enhance engagement between our two countries." And what kind of statement did we get about Mexico from the United States? You could probably repeat it with me from memory. When Mexico sends its people, they're not sending the best. They're sending people who have lots of problems, and they're bringing those problems with them. They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists, and some, I assume, are good people. When Donald Trump signed his infamous order banning Muslims, even though attacks by Muslims accounted for only 1/3 of 1% of all murders in America last year, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau countered the ban, appropriately enough, on Twitter. by tweeting, "Those fleeing persecution, terror, and war, Canadians will welcome you, regardless of your faith. Diversity is our strength." It would appear that Canada has become what we used to be. A growing number of asylum seekers are crossing from the U.S. into Canada by avoiding customs checkpoints. Recently, 2 refugees from Ghana who weren't dressed for the weather paid $400 Canadian for a taxi to take them to the border somewhere in the province of Manitoba. Their trek through fields of waist-high snow at night resulted in their losing all of their fingers to frostbite. I think one of them was able to keep his thumbs. This is pure desperation, and the air is thick with it. If we let our guard down, if we allow things to continue to develop the way they're going now, then it won't be long before U.S. citizens who are not white or Christian or straight may contemplate doing the same thing. Update your passports now. Many are due to expire because it's been almost 10 years since they were required for entry into Canada and Mexico and other close places. And the backlog is expected to be heavy. Some states are now trying to pass laws preventing political rallies and protests. One state legislature has tried to pass a law making it legal to prosecute protest organizers under racketeering laws and seize their assets. It may come as no surprise that there's a connection in some of these states with the Trump campaign. I think it's pretty safe to say this will never be the case in Vermont, will it? No! But in order to ensure this doesn't happen, we need to continue to rally and to march and to call, write, and visit our representatives and support those who are unable to do so for themselves for fear of being deported, torn away from family and friends, and in the case of children and young adults, removed from the only life they have ever known. In order to ensure that we keep what freedoms we have as citizens, we need to do all that we can to support a free press. Yes. A press that speaks truth to power and continues to expose the lies, exaggerations, and alternative facts so doggedly being used to create and sustain an atmosphere of fear and anger. In order to ensure the safety of immigrants and refugees here in Vermont, a state that has more immigrants and refugees per capita than any other northern border state, we need to offer sanctuary and aid and work closely with immigrant and refugee support groups. In St. Johnsbury, my church is now talking about the possibility of becoming an official sanctuary congregation. Especially when ICE agents are getting bolder about where they go to pick people up. Immigrants are a vital part of our dairy farm community here in Vermont, and there's a danger that without them, some farms will go under. Immigrants have always had an important place in the fabric of America. Our early growth was made possible thanks to the often backbreaking work of immigrants, all of whom have suffered at the hands of the white majority. Yay. Back in the day, we vilified the Chinese and the Irish who toiled to build the great rail system connecting East and West Coast. We vilified blacks who, after being brought here totally against their will, did more than any other group to build this country. We vilified the Italians. Indeed, the largest mass lynching in U.S. history took place in New Orleans in 1891 when 13 Italians were lynched by a mob of 10,000 people. We vilified the Catholics, primarily in the form of the Italians and the Irish. We vilified Jews when they tried to gain entrance during Hitler's rise to power. We vilified the Japanese, locking them in internment camps during World War II. And now, we're turning on the Muslims. In the spirit of hatred that's been growing daily, racism is back in fashion. And Vermont, as progressive as it is not exempt. Anti-Semitism is on the rise since the election, including here in Vermont. And all Trump can do is to say, tisk, tisk, what a horrible thing. His own daughter converted to Judaism, and he can't even call for some kind of investigation into the recent cemetery desecrations and bomb threats at Jewish community centers. But let her clothing line be criticized, and he is all over it. By repeating radical Islamic terrorists over and over again, Trump is doing a great job of creating fear of all things Muslim. Because just under half of all Americans agree with banning them. Clearly, our country is in need of a reset. The list of things we can do to get it back on track is endless. So endless as to be discouraging and confusing at times. It's good and necessary that we continue to rally together in solidarity through protests such as this. But in order to remain sane, my advice is that if you want to get involved on a deeper level, then you should follow your passion by finding one, maybe two areas you can really sink your teeth into and put all of your efforts into that. Otherwise, you'll go spinning off in too many directions and burn out before accomplishing anything. Martin Niemöller was a prominent German Lutheran pastor who emerged as an outspoken public foe of Adolf Hitler and spent the last 7 years of Nazi rule in concentration camps. He is perhaps best remembered for these words. First they came for the socialist, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. Let us continue to speak boldly for each other. Let us speak the truth. Let us support those who cannot speak for themselves. There is power in numbers. There is power in speaking out. There is power in simply doing what is right. Never lose sight of the fact that we have the power to turn this winter of despair into a spring of hope. May it be so.